Good afternoon, everyone. Please allow me, Layan Abu Mailish, to welcome you all to the 4th Annual English Language Conference 2026, jointly organized by the Queen Rania Teacher Academy and Georgia State University. This year's conference theme is Inclusive English Teaching in a Changing World. This theme reflects our shared commitment to creating learning environments where every student feels seen, valued, and empowered to succeed. Over the course of this conference, educators, researchers, and practitioners from around the world are coming together to exchange ideas, share experiences, and explore innovative approaches to English language teaching in today's rapidly evolving educational landscape. At QRTA, the mission has always centered on empowering educators and improving the quality of teaching and learning through professional development, collaboration, and innovation. Together with GSU, this partnership continues to build bridges between global expertise and local educational impact, making this conference an important platform for meaningful dialogue and professional growth. Before we begin, I would like to encourage everyone to actively participate in today's session. As you listen to the presentation, please feel free to prepare your questions and share them in the chat box throughout the session. We will have a Q&A segment at the end where the speaker, I'm sorry, can we all turn off the cameras and mics? Thank you. Where the speaker will address as many of your questions and comments as possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Ms. Sirar Bakr, Senior Coordinator and Head of Science Department at the Dasman Bilingual School in Kuwait. She brings extensive experience and valuable insights in the field of English language education, particularly in the area of applying neuroscience to teaching to support inclusive classrooms and ensure all students can access, engage with, and retain learning. Today, Ms. Sirar will be speaking with us about Stop Teaching, Start Encoding, what neuroscience tells us about inclusive English learning. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ms. Sirar Abu Bakr. Thank you, Ms. Sirar. You can start now.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and good day to you all. My name is Sirar Abu Bakr, and as I was introduced, I worked as a senior coordinator at Dasman Bilingual School in Kuwait. Thank you for being here this afternoon, where we explore the basic science of how the brain is designed to learn. Before we start, there is a QR code at the top of the screen, which will take you to a Mentimeter. I've also shared the link in the chat. I'm sorry. Can I ask the participants to please mute their mics, please? Thank you very much. There is a QR code at the top of the screen that will take you to a Mentimeter. We will have a few interactive activities. I also shared the code in the chat, the link in the chat, if you prefer it this way. Can everyone just let me know if you are able to see my screen, my presentation, please?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I hope you find it both practical and useful. Before we begin, this is a quick overview of what we will explore today, starting with how memory works and moving through some of the key challenges that impact learning and inclusion in the classroom. As you will notice throughout the session, many of the strategies we discuss today are already familiar to us as educators. However, understanding the basic scientific reasoning behind these practices helps us to apply them more intentionally and more effectively in the classroom. So today, we'll first look at some of these challenges that impact learning, then briefly explore the science behind them, and finally, connect that understanding to practical classroom strategies that support learning and inclusion. Before we begin, I would like everyone to take a moment to look at this illustration here. Take a moment, and as educators, our focus, remember, should not only be on what we are teaching, but on whether or not the students are actually learning what we're teaching. While we remember that the brain is adaptable, capable of growth, and eager to learn, when supported with the right strategies and experiences. The brain is extremely moldable, and it is up to us as educators to hold the right tools and apply the right strategies. So today, we are going to move through basic 4 challenges that face every educator in a classroom. We will look at these 4 key areas that strongly impact learning. We'll look at memory, cognitive overload, making connections, and passive learning. We'll begin by looking at memory specifically and how it influences what the students are actually learning, which will take us to our first Mentimeter. So that is the link that I shared with everyone. And also there is a QR code. Let's answer this first question. After 1 week of teaching something, how much do students actually remember? So if you can all go ahead and respond. Our first response, somewhere between 30 to 50%. Less than 20%. Less than 20%. Okay, so we have the majority of our votes, less than 50% at least, after 1 week of teaching. If we look at this one, this is called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, which shows us that without reinforcement, memory tends to deteriorate and decay very rapidly. In fact, students may forget up to 90% of new information within 1 week if not revisited, with about 50% within the first hour. What does that mean for us as educators? So before we talk about how we can improve teaching, we first need to understand one very simple truth. The brain is designed to forget. This is normal biology. Unless learning is successfully encoded into what we call the long-term memory, it will gradually disappear. This is not because the students are careless or incapable. This is a normal part. Forgetting is a normal part of how the memory works. So first, let's understand that learning begins. Are you able to see my, the laser pointer? Yes, thank you very much. Learning begins when we have attention and concentration. So if students are not focused, learning does not really begin. After that, the information enters what we call immediate memory. This is a very short period of time, and at this stage, students can use the information briefly, but it's still extremely fragile in their brains. Next, this information can enter the working memory as the students are exploring and working with this information that we have presented them with. However, this is still very limited and temporary, which is why students can easily become overwhelmed or forget information quickly. Finally, this is here what we want. For learning to move into long-term memory, this is where they can retrieve it up to years ahead. For that to happen, students need repetition, retrieval, and reuse. Without these, the brain will gradually let the information go, forget it, and replace it with more information. So don't be discouraged, because forgetting can be reduced when learning is revisited over time. This graph here shows us that each time students retrieve or revisit information, memory becomes stronger and forgetting slows down. So over time, every time that we repeat and retrieve, this helps moving the learning into the long-term memory. So instead of being very low retrieval or remembering, it increases with every time that we revisit and repeat the information. How can we do that? So just keep in mind before we talk about this that inclusion can be supported by designing against forgetting. If we design our lessons with that in mind, then we can help students to remember. How can we do that? You will find that you are very familiar with some of these methodologies. When we talk about repetition, we don't mean repeating the same explanation again and again. However, it's revisiting the learning in different ways over time. For example, retrieval, asking questions from the previous lessons. This is something that we all are familiar with. Every time you start a new lesson, ask them about something that they learned in the previous lesson. Spiraling back and bringing old concepts back into new lessons, even if briefly. And this is not something that you can do just from the week. Sometimes you revisit a concept that you studied the week before, the lesson before, the semester before, or years ago. Spiraling back to basic information, even if briefly, will help consolidate this information into the student's memory. It is very important to vary the formats, discussions, writing quizzes, visuals. It's not just re-explaining or reiterating the information, it's visiting it in different ways. And finally, recaps. It's very important to close every lesson with 1 or 2 minutes at the end of the lesson to recap everything that we have learned during the lesson, and even at the end of the week, recap the entire week in a few minutes. This is especially important for multilingual learners because they often need more exposure and more opportunities to process and use language deeply before it becomes stable in long-term memory. Now that we have discussed memory, we can move to the next part, which is cognitive overload. Working memory is very limited. It can only handle a few elements at a time. Some research says that only a maximum of 3 to 5 at a time. Once we go beyond that limit, the students will stop processing deeply and begin to simply try to keep up with what we are saying. This is not because they are weak or incapable, it's because the system becomes overwhelmed. I have put this here intentionally because we all know that if we take too many plugs and hook them at the same place, this will overwhelm, right? There might be a short circuit. The same happens with the brain when you are trying to give too much information. Cognitive overload affects all learners, but it can especially impact struggling and multilingual students who are often processing both content and language at the same time. So I want to pose the next interactivity. I want everyone to go here and in a few words, just tell me, what do you think causes overload in your classroom? Is anyone able to access this Mentimeter? If not, you can just write in the chat. And I will look at the chats. All right, lots of activities with short time to process. Very good. Any other ideas of what might cause overload or cognitive overload in the classroom? Lots of activities, too much information in a short time. Students will lose focus. They will be confused. Excellent. This is all very valid. So now I want you to look at the following misfit content. I like this one. Excellent. Very good. Let's look at long instructions. Excellent. So let's look at the next activity and then we can look together. I want you all to read this paragraph very carefully. Tell me what is the main cause of volcanic activity and 2 effects and a benefit of volcanoes. You have 1 minute. Sometimes this is something that we do with students in the classroom. We give them unclear instructions, quick instructions, something that's not clear, something that's too much for them to look at, especially with second language learners. Now, I want you to think about that, and in 1 word only, tell me how that felt like. 1 word, please. Frustrated is a big one, and one that we hear over and over again from students. So thank you for writing that. Overwhelmed, excellent. Now I'm looking forward to this word cloud. So I would invite everyone to try to give me 1 word of how that feels, even if you repeat one that's already on the screen. Confused, yes, absolutely. We hear this from students all the time. I'm overwhelmed, I'm confused, I'm frustrated. Looking for 1 more word before moving on. I would say also that many times students say they are not sure what to do. They didn't understand the task. Anxious, frustrated, excellent. So just by looking at something like this slide over here, the students have already been put off. It causes them to have a mental block because they have no idea what we need. So how can we fix this? All right, how can we reduce cognitive overload? Instead of long instructions, which were mentioned earlier, give them a visual display, right? We can break tasks into clear steps, display them visually, model the task first before asking students to complete it independently. Similarly, instead of relying on complex language, we can support the students with context clues, highlight the keywords for them, which is extremely important for second language learners, and frequently check for understandings. Once the instructions are given, you need to make sure that they understood them before moving on. These small adjustments can make learning more accessible and easier for the brain to process. So let's visit the re-example and look at it here. If you look, we have organized the instructions, made them clear, direct, and made them visual so that the students are always being able to see them on the screen. I have highlighted over here some of the keywords that they are looking for. This makes it very easy for them to follow them. I want you all to keep in mind something very important. When you are designing your learning experiences for the students, to reduce the cognitive load, it's not lowering the standards. It's making the learning accessible and inclusive. Now that we are done discussing very briefly cognitive overload, I'm going to move to the next part, which is making connections. Because when we introduce new learning to the students, it often feels unfamiliar and disconnected from what they already know. The brain has to build understanding from scratch. This increases confusion, it increases the cognitive load, and often reduces the engagement with the learning. The learning becomes non-stimulating, and the students struggle to catch up. Which takes me to this next part. Now, there is a little bit of science here, but I'm going to try to make it quick and simplified. This is called the schema theory. The schema theory basically explains that the brain does not store all knowledge in one place. Every time that you are giving students new pieces of information or giving them a new experience, the brain organizes this information into connected categories or mental frameworks, what we call schema. Every time there's a new experience, the brain activates different schemas and tries to put the relevant information there. When the students encounter new learning, the brain will try to connect it to something already stored in these schemas. And this is very important. This is making it easier for the students to retrieve the information later. The more connection, the stronger the connection, the easier it becomes to understand, remember, and retrieve the information later. And this is why activating the student prior knowledge is very important. The more we trigger these related schemas, the more we strengthen and embed the learning into long-term memory. For example, if we look back at our example about the volcanoes, we should not begin with complex scientific definition. Instead, we can activate related schema by discussing things students already know. For example, heat, melted objects, lava they've seen in movies, fire, molten rock. These are all things that they have been exposed to in the past and will activate different schemas. Once those connections are activated, the brain then has a stronger foundation onto which it can attach the new learning, making the understanding much easier and more meaningful. This also highlights the importance of horizontal alignment, because when the students are when the students are exposed to something similar across different subjects, that makes the understanding easier. It makes it more meaningful and more relevant. Students encounter connected ideas in different classes, activating and strengthening existing schemas and making it easier for them to remember and understand and process the information that they are learning. Ignoring this strips students of some of the strongest tools for understanding, processing, and retaining information. So, how can we solve this? Again, you will note that these are strategies that we all know about and use, or attempt to use at least, in our classroom. First, and very important, is activating prior knowledge. Before introducing a new topic, ask, what do they know about this? What can you relate it to? Secondly, building connections. You can always ask students, can you think of similar situations, similar information, or similar things that you studied in the past? Reading with purpose. When you give them the instructions at the beginning, you ask them, what's the main idea? What are the supporting details? Look for the opinion of the writer. You will tell me later what you think about this paragraph that you read. And finally, deepening understanding. Keep asking them, do you have personal experience? Can you apply this differently? Can you think of other contexts? Remember that personalizing learning is one of the strongest simulators of making connections, because the brain is more likely to engage and remember information that means meaningful and connected to existing knowledge. The next and last challenge that I want to talk about today is passive learning. With passive learning, students are not thinking actively, and the learning remains surface level. Research has shown us over and over again that the depth of processing really matters. The more deeply students think about something, the more likely they are to understand it and remember it later. When students are not actively thinking, learning often remains surface level and is quickly forgotten. This can be especially challenging for second language classrooms, where students are already processing both content and language at the same time. So, what can we do to encourage deeper thinking? Instead of asking yes or no questions, you can always ask deeper questions. Stimulate them. Why? How do you know? What do you think? Ask students to comment on each other's answers. What do you think of their answer, his answer, her answer, and why? We sometimes have a rule about the 5 whys in the classroom. So for every answer you get, you ask why to the next student and then the next student until they reach the core of their thinking or learning. Instead of quick answers and quick responses, what you want to do is giving them thinking time before accepting answers. This also allows more learners to participate meaningfully, especially in second language classroom. It also lowers the risk of students who are faster at thinking in a different language and gives a chance for those who need their time to think and engage. Strategies such as think, pair, and share. These are very important. However, you should design them in a way that stimulates the students to think first before they share with their partners or their group and then share with the entire class. By giving them the ability or the time to think first is very important and allows them to deepen their understanding. Sometimes students struggle with finding the right words, so providing them with sentence starters, encouraging them to write before speaking are 2 very successful strategies in stimulating their deeper thinking. Sometimes you can play a game with your students, have multiple cards of sentence starters, and then you can distribute them randomly in the classroom, and then they can start talking, and this will help them begin the process of talking or thinking. These small changes increase active processing, making learning deeper, more engaging, and more memorable. Keep in mind that this is especially important for second language speakers. Now that we have covered some of these challenges, I would like everyone to take a moment to think. Thank you for the eager students who have already answered this. To think about which one of those you think you might start applying or working on first in your classrooms. And later you can write also in the chat why you think that. Memory and passive learning are both extremely, extremely important. I see memory, yes. Keep in mind that while some of us might want to attempt to, work on one of these challenges, it's very important that your planning or your lessons includes a multiple of these strategies and understanding the scientific basis of why this is important. Thank you for everyone who is participating. Now, before we end this, there is a question that I always like to leave educators with. If the brain is the organ for learning, then why aren't teachers brain experts? It is very important to know that we don't have to study the brain or be brain surgeons in order to understand the ways that the mind works or the brain works. Something else that's very important that I would like to leave you with is understanding that these students, their brain is extremely adaptable, and it is up to us in order to use this capability of this brain in order to create lifelong learners and students who are always eager to learn and ready to learn. The strategies that we discussed today are not simply trends or classroom preferences, no matter how many times they are mentioned in ways that we don't understand the reason behind. They are supported by consistent findings across decades of research in cognitive science. And ultimately, it's not just about using different strategies. It's about aligning these strategies and our teaching with how learning and memory actually work. Finally, I would like to thank you for your attention and participation, and open for any questions if you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sirar, for such an insightful and engaging session. Your perspective on the cognitive learning and the memory for the students have given us much to reflect on as we continue working towards more inclusive and effective English language teaching practices. We will now move on to the Q&A session. Please, everyone, I would like to invite you to continue posting your questions and comments in the chat box, and we will address as many of them as time allows. I would like to also thank our audience for your active participation and thoughtful engagement throughout the session. We hope today's discussion inspires you with new ideas, meaningful conversations, and continued collaboration among educators and professionals in our field. Please, Ms. Sirari, feel free to answer their questions.
Yes, I'm actually looking at all the comments in the chat, and it is much more engaged. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to see it while I was presenting. So thank you very much for everyone who has written something in the chat. I see here that Ms. Manar has requested a copy of the presentation. In fact, what I'm going to do right now is I'm typing my email into the chat, and anyone who would like to have a copy or get in touch with me in any way or has any more questions after that, please feel free to communicate with me at any time.
Ms. Sirar, I can attach the presentation for them in the chat.
Yes, excellent. I would
if you would
appreciate
like
that.
to do so.
I haven't found any other questions, so if someone has a question, we still have time. I tried to plan this to give us time. So yes, Ms. Lian is attaching it right now. Mr.
Yes,
Hamza
I'm
in
working
the
on
chat. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions or any feedback, it will be more than welcome. I would like to thank everyone for attending today, and I hope that this was insightful. How to teach with a classroom with not just multilingual, but diverse mental abilities. For example, a classroom with normal students and students with learning disabilities. All right, that's an excellent question, and I will give a very brief answer. However, I would like also to invite all the attendees to put in their ideas to answer this question. The basics of how memory works, how cognitive overload affects us, the brain schemas, these are all universal things. Now, there are always different accommodations that can be done with different situations. Some of the things that we've seen, for example, in the paragraph for about the volcanoes, these are actually things that are used in many classrooms where there are learning difficulties, the highlighting of the words, sometimes different text, sometimes increasing of space. So it depends on what difficulty specifically is being faced. And I'm sure that this is something that there are many more experts. What I can tell you is that the concepts, the scientific concepts that we discussed today are universal. I do have a little bit of research and articles about it. So if you can email me later, I can share them with you. Yes, Ms. Huda is saying, I always make sure that my lesson has more than one teaching strategies that can help all students. I'm going to make an analogy here because I agree with you 100%, Ms. Huda. And one of the things that I like doing always when we're teaching or when we are training the teachers, and we encourage teachers to do it all the time, is actually give analogies because they make things much easier to understand for students. So my analogy here is going to be very simple. Teaching without having planned and intentional and science-backed strategies is like cooking without any spices. The more strategies, the more spices, the more flavorful the dish. So yes, I agree with you 100%. However, we need to be very careful from overwhelming the students with too many things in the same classroom. So for every class, it is very important to intentionally choose 2 or 3 different strategies to apply. There are some that should be there in every single classroom. For example, closing the classroom with a quick recap of what was learned. Starting the next class with, asking the students to remember something that they have done before or studied the previous lesson. These are things that we should integrate into every classroom. However, the different activities, we have to be very careful how we plan them so that we don't overwhelm the students as well. Mr. Maher Hussein, multi-level grouping, students, oops, something happened. Learn from each other. Yes, 100%, absolutely agree. Sometimes even more from what they learned from the teacher. I will agree with you 100%. In fact, one of the strategies that is encouraged to be used is the teacher-student. So you always have the higher achievers, and these are your best friends in the classroom. They finish, some of them, start creating disruption or get bored. Give them the task of going around the groups and supporting the other students. They do tend to listen to each other, understand from each other, sometimes much more than they do from a teacher. Student discipline is a major challenge in today's classrooms. All those fake strategies and plans simply don't work. Parents must become integrated. A few students are disrupting other students from learning. Mr. Muhammad, I agree with you. I agree with you on this one. However, we need to remember one thing. We need both to be something that we need to work on. So imagine that you have a completely disciplined classroom, no proper teaching strategies, or all the teaching strategies in the world without proper discipline in the classroom. Now, I can talk for an hour about classroom discipline, okay? But I agree with you 100%. However, both are equally important. Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Hiba. Thank you very much. Even the strategies should depend on the student individual differences. Absolutely. And this is why we always say the teachers know their students best. You spend a couple of weeks in the beginning of every academic year knowing your students, understanding your students. And that's why we always, even when we train admin that support teachers or coach teacher or evaluate and appraise teachers, we always tell them that take your observations after the class, have a quick meeting with the teacher and ask for their perspective first, because they know their students. One funny incident that I personally had in the past is one day the principal walked into my classroom and there was a student sitting in the corner, quiet, not doing anything. And the principal told me, engage him, talk to him, do something. Why is he just sitting there in the corner? What is he supposed to be doing? And after the class, I asked my principal very politely to please next time talk to me outside the class, not in front of the students. But that student sitting in the corner looking at the wall was doing exactly what he needed to be doing, because this is the only way he can focus. Every time I asked them to look at me or pay attention on the board, he was not able to do it. So you know your students best. Differentiated instruction, different strategies, different classrooms. Sometimes you will use different strategies in each classroom. You are the boss of your class. And dear teachers, do not let anyone tell you otherwise. As long as you're doing what we're supposed to be doing as educators and keeping the best interest of the students at heart. Thank you very much. What is the ideal brain-friendly classroom size and student number do you suggest? I think that I will not answer this question, because if you're asking the teacher in me, it will give you a completely different answer than the admin part of me. So I will keep it to myself. Motivating our students to use the knowledge they had in their daily life outside the classroom and ask them how they use it and with whom. Actually, this will improve their memories. Absolutely 100%. The more you learn about your students, the more you will be able to give them topics and lessons and relate to information. Remember when we talked about making connections? If you have a classroom full of people who like cars, then maybe your article that they need to be needs to be about cars. If they like science or history or whatever topic they like, then you can design the learning to engage them in things that they are interested in, which is extremely important. Okay, Ms.
Thank you
Lian?
so much, Ms. Sirar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. On behalf of the Queen Rania Teacher Academy and Georgia State University, thank you for being part of the 4th Annual English Language Conference 2026. We look forward to seeing you in the next sessions, and we wish you a productive and inspiring conference experience. Thank you.